Our next keynote speaker is Dr. Tricia Yeoh. She is the CEO of IDEAS, Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. She is also an adjunct senior research fellow at our School of Arts and Social Sciences, right over here. She holds a PhD in political science from the University of Nottingham, Malaysia, which she examined the federal-state relations and opposition's subnational durability within dominant party authoritarian regimes. That's a PhD for you. She's a Monash University Malaysia alumna, yes, in majoring in econometrics and marketing, and she holds a master's in research methods in psychology from Warwick. Her publications include the books The Spirit of Merdeka, The Road to Reform, and The States of Reform. She received the Distinguished Alumni Award from us, Monash University Malaysia, in 2017, and most recently, the 25th Anniversary Alumni Award in July this year. And just a few days ago, Dr. Tricia was named as one of the 100 changemakers creating real impact in Malaysia by Wiki Impact. So it is my pleasure to welcome our next keynote speaker, Dr. Tricia Yeoh.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction, and it's so good to be back at Monash. When I say back, I don't really mean back, because when I studied at Monash, we studied at Sunway University. So I told your colleagues earlier that all the money that we gave to Monash University that we paid for our school fees have contributed to your wonderful campus and building here. So well done. So thank you to Nazirul, chair of this conference, Prof. Nafis Alam, head of School of Business, Dr. Azmi Sharom, deputy chair of the Election Commission, colleagues from Monash, students, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can tell, I love being back at Monash. I have had various affiliations here, and I look forward to doing more together. Last week I gave a talk at INTI University College. It was more than 100 students, and the topic was on the state of politics in Malaysia today. And after I gave that speech, two students came up to me, and one of the girls, who was, I suppose, 18 already, said, why should I be given the right to vote? We all know that the voting age has been lowered to 18. I don't know anything. I can only, I only get news and information from my parents. I don't know what to trust. That was one. The second guy, who was, very desperately, came up to me and he said, oh, Tricia, please tell me what to read. I don't know what to read anymore. I don't know what to trust. There's so much information being, lobbied at us, that news of Malaysia, news of anything global, especially with things like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict going on, they don't know what to read and they don't know what to trust. So I think this really is, it captures the zeitgeist of our times. Even we have very little contact point about what to trust. Who do we trust? So thanks for inviting me here. I just want to say up front that I'm coming from a think tank, so I come from IDEAS. And I don't claim to know the best or the latest technologies. Many of you are researchers on data and democracy, but I come to you speaking with experience about policy work and in the policy world. So as a think tank, we focus on evidence-based solutions, right? And we, as an independent think tank, we also have the privilege of actually sitting right in the middle between various stakeholders. We meet with government, civil society, academia, like you here today, media, and the private sector. All of our work is aimed at trying to find the right policy solutions for the biggest and the most current policy problems. And this definitely is one of the biggest and most current policy problems that we're facing. And I think because of our unique makeup, we also have found ourselves in that very interesting space in between the different stakeholders, where both government policymakers on the one hand and private corporations on the other hand want to talk to us, right? They want to ask us, how can we help them solve their problems? On the one hand, I think that's what was given to me today, like basically the problem of business and data. On the one hand, the private sector always wants to speed ahead. They want to find efficient solutions to making their business work. And many times, they actually honestly do believe that they're doing good, right? But on the other hand, governments want to regulate them, keeping them in line with their laws and policy. We know, for example, that data is a valuable commodity. It was said earlier that data is the new oil. We know this for some of us who are on social media or who use apps on our phone. Others may not. But there are positive aspects, right, that aid scientific research and public health. How many of you track the number of steps that you've taken in a day through your phones? I think in the area of health and health science, the evidence is quite clear that there can be good benefits to it. But we also know, and here's where I talk about some of the problems, right? That businesses increasingly profit from data. COVID-19 pandemic was a period where all of us were stuck at home, no matter where we were in the world. And that accelerated data collection for more precise product offerings. Every time that you clicked on something from Shopee or Lazada or wherever you bought your goods from, data was being collected from your device, from your phones. So this dependence on data means that companies have detailed user information. It's a marketer and advertiser's dream, right? In the past, you would just go to the shops, pick up the products. Nobody would know who you are. But we know now that algorithms use this data for targeted ads, modifying our behavior. So I opened up my social media as well to see what kind of ads were targeted at me. There was something on, maternity athleisure. I don't know what athleisure means. There was another one called, using sustainable products to produce gym clothing. So save our seeds, shop today, something like that, right? Obviously, social media knows who I am and what my profile is. I think basically, this phenomenon raises the questions about our freedom of choice. Shoshana Zuboff, who wrote the book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, emphasized that surveillance capitalists now modify our behavior. Our behavior is actually actively being changed as we speak. The more data is collected from us, the data is used for us to market at us. So the question is, can we really choose freely? Another problem is filter bubbles. So filter bubbles on social media platforms, we know this already, further divide our communities and undermine our democracy and rational conversations. What are the implications on a country as heterogeneous as Malaysia? If you happen to belong in a conservative grouping, or if you are a past supporter, it means that you're only going to be exposed to that kind of news. And if you're a liberal, you're only going to be exposed to the kind of news that liberals read. The less and less engagement you have with each other, the communities are no longer going to be able to understand each other and assume the worst of the other. Due to the increasing amount of data generated as well, we have incidents like the huge Yahoo breach where more than 3 billion users' data was accessible, data privacy problems with apps like MySejahtera. I don't know how many of you still have MySejahtera as an app in your phones. It was compulsory for us, right, during the COVID-19 period. And I think there are still a lot of questions there about what company was making use of the data and who actually owns the data that has been collected. So all of this, is basically highlights the importance of protecting data. Then, of course, we have the advent of AI. I'm sure some of you will be talking about that today. I just watched something this morning which says that technology has progressed so much that with just 3 seconds of our voices, or playing of the piano, the AI can generate our voices and probably can deliver the speech, better than me. So what does this say about things like scams, cyber fraud, identity theft? I mean, the list just goes on and on. So I think there is a consensus here that 2023, this is the year where we can no longer really trust video and photos. And if we can't trust that, there's a huge trust deficit in the world today of our institutions, of our governments, of corporations. Who then can we turn to? So I understand that there's these feelings of loss, of hopelessness, right? We know that because we ourselves feel like we are subject to the hands of these, big corporations. One of the solutions lies in better regulation over data security and cybersecurity. Malaysia has something called the PDPA, the Personal Data Protection Act. But it's still very weak, and there are many amendments that are needed, right, to make companies accountable for data that's in their possession. And that's happening right now. But here's what I really want to say. The truth is that government is constantly playing a catch-up game. And innovation will always outpace regulation. Laws, policies will always lag behind corporate disruptors. The speed at which the digital world is moving today means that government will always be lagging behind. But this is not new. We think it's new, but it's not. The phenomenon of playing catch-up is not new. I've been in this policy think tank world for, about 15 years, and I've seen all kinds of new things that came up, and governments saying, we're scared of this, and consumers worried as well. So in June 2015, right, that's like 8 years ago now, we received this call from a company called Uber. So everyone knows Uber, right? Today. They had then been operating in Malaysia for about a year, and they were facing problems from taxi companies that were increasingly threatened by this new tech kid on the block. Regulators were on their back, wanted to ban them from operating in the country. Around the same time, another company emerged called Airbnb. And they were also facing issues, right? Because Malaysian hotel operators were raising concerns about unregulated accommodations, safety standards. How can we trust these new disruptors? In both cases, the government didn't really have a clue what to do. Their initial reaction was to just have blanket bans on these disruptors. In the end, the companies managed to reach some kind of compromise with the government, but it was only made possible through many behind-the-scenes engagement meetings with policymakers. So just remember that, and I'm going to come back to that when I close. These engagement meetings, right? So Grab, another app that everyone probably has in their phones today, this is again in the early days. So again, regulators wanted to ban them. Imagine if they banned them today, we wouldn't have them in our phones. We actually worked with Grab to produce some research to show how drivers of Grab actually increase their quality of life because they can easily, actually it was really funny, taxi drivers, so without Grab, taxi drivers would often sit in their taxis waiting for passengers, and many of the male taxi drivers were found to have kidney problems because they would wait in their taxis and they wouldn't go to the toilet. So they would just sit in their taxis, basically not go and pee. Whereas with Grab, they had that right to be able to, accept or deny rides. So basically, these companies had to conduct research, engage with think tanks like ours to show policy impact of how tech could actually make lives better. And it was just something as simple as reducing their kidney problems, right? So that's just an example of how I think we can use the policy space to have these conversations. But I think another problem is who regulates. So I think the question is, okay, yes, we regulate, but who regulates and which body does that? IBM in Malaysia, I remember this as well because they also reached out to us. They wanted to launch their new personified health robot called Watson. It was this powerful AI system. I think they have it called Watson X now, right? And they wanted to use it in the field of healthcare. But because it was 2017 and they belonged both in the categories of health and technology, the government just didn't know what to do, right? They're like, is it the Ministry of Health that should regulate you? Or is it the Ministry of, what would it be? They've changed the names many times now to adapt with the current trends. So the ministry is in charge of both areas. They were bouncing back and forth between two ministries, and in the end, I think they finally got it approved, but this is the point. We talked about voting. PAS is a political party that has just recently launched its My One PAS app. It's a super app that you can find on your phone today. This is just last week. They have an e-wallet. It enables users to pay bills, and with MasterCard, they collaborated. So users can actually have financial transactions of 35,000 as the limit, and including international transactions, right? Although I don't know whether they got approval from Bank Negara for this yet. We're doing another project right now on fintech, financial tech. So Grab, again, mention Grab. It's a super app. It allows you to buy food, allows you to do ride sharing, buy groceries. Again, who regulates this? Who's going to regulate PAS? Is it Bank Negara? Is it, the Election Commission? Who's going to tell them that you have to shut your app down, right? So the situation we face today, based on the problems we are grappling with, is really not new. It feels new, but I just want to bring this new insight that it's not that new. Regulators have been playing catch up forever. It's a new issue, but it's the same playbook. And it comes to democracy, right? This is the title of our conference today. Does data strengthen or undermine democracy when in the hands of business? I think ultimately it depends on how we manage these businesses. We often have this thing about big business being this like big bad boys out there, but after all, they're made up of people too. They, just like politicians, react. They respond to people's behavior. They are highly sensitive to negative news. Reputational damage is disastrous for business. And there's no running away, right, from the digital economy. The World Economic Forum Future of the Jobs Report 2023 says that more than 75% of companies are going to adopt AI and cloud computing in the future. Data scientists are one of the fastest growing jobs in the world today. So maybe even my job will be irrelevant in 10, 20 years from now. Or maybe even your jobs, I'm sorry to threaten you, but I mean, as academics, is there job security for what we do? Or is it that we need to be able to learn, to grapple with the data, with the tech, and then use that for good? Malaysia is one of the fastest growing data centers as well. We are ranked 4th behind Singapore, Hong Kong, and South Korea in this, data center competitiveness index. And what I'm trying to say is, moving forward, if we are to embrace this digital economy as part and parcel of our economic ecosystem of the future, what can we do to counter these loopholes where data does undermine democracy or does, restrict our freedoms of choice, so to speak? I offer 3 very broad solutions that I think as a society we can approach, and hopefully this can be discussed the rest of the day. So first, government should not necessarily have more regulation, but better regulation. What does that mean, right? So the regulation must be well balanced between allowing the agility of businesses to run efficiently for profit, while at the same time adhering to some basic principles of transparency, fairness, and the rule of law. The government should exercise their role as setting the ground rules of the game. The best thing they can do is to create this environment for competition to flourish. Competition is what makes businesses respond better to the market. Malaysia has something called the Competition Act, but it's got so many loopholes, whole sectors like telco are carved out of that. So, we have Malaysia, MyCC, the Malaysia's Competition Commission, which needs to do better in creating more competition. Something specific the government can do right immediately is to follow after the EU. It's technical and boring. It's called the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. It has this very, very extremely stringent law that provides protections to all of us, right, as individuals. There's a long list of principles there based on things like, accuracy, storage limitation, integrity, confidentiality. Basically, if you want to know what GDPR is, it's this. It requires all websites to explicitly disclose that they are collecting your personal data. So the businesses are legally obliged to inform you why, how they're going to store this data, and this is what we should expect our government to do as well. If there's anything that the Malaysian government can do tomorrow, overnight, it would be this: follow the EU GDPR. The EU GDPR also last month fined TikTok, $368 million for violating the personal data of children, because the sign-up process on TikTok makes the accounts public by default. And if you open TikTok today, I don't know how many of you have TikTok in your phones. Well, if you're interested in data and democracy and tech, I would highly recommend you open it. In fact, it was the day after the election last year in November. That was the day that I downloaded TikTok and I opened it on my phone because I had heard so much about how political parties were using TikTok as a platform for these 3R issues, right? And I just wanted to know, what kind of nonsense was being spewed out on that platform. And I think I knew what to expect, but even watching it created this kind of visceral experience where if you're not used to it, it's very repugnant. The content, it draws you in as well. There's no time for breathing. It's video after video. It's short. So the other thing I wanted to say is that it's not just data that's the new commodity. Attention is the new commodity. You can search for it. It's the economics of attention, and it is attention that these social media platforms are actually marketing. They want to draw us in for as long as possible on whatever platform as possible because that's where they get their ad revenue, right? Where was I? TikTok. Yeah, so anyway, the point is that TikTok was fined, and I think if the same regulation were to have impact here, they would probably do the same. I know the Minister of Communications, Fahmi Fadzil, is trying hard, and I think they've called TikTok for discussions and so on. Well, it will be a long time before any regional standards come about in Asia. ASEAN is nowhere near what the EU is. People actually don't think much of ASEAN because they don't have that weight, right? We do have an ASEAN framework on digital data governance and the APEC privacy framework, but they're not really enforceable. We don't have harmonized laws in this region. So that's all to do with government, what regulators can do. The big second thing is companies themselves. You can't go anywhere today without hearing about this thing called ESG. It's actually very boring. And if you go to ESG conferences, yes, you are probably bound to fall asleep. It's boring, but maybe the boring technical things are actually what's needed. Maybe that's exactly what we do need. Environmental and social and governance bottom lines, right? Can the companies show us that they're doing these things? BHR, Business and Human Rights, IDEAS has been involved in drafting of what's called a National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. There's a big conference today, actually, and I'm going to head over there. So if they launch this NAP on BHR, there will also be things there and sort of conditions or suggestions of how businesses can do better. The US, for example, only lifted its ban on palm oil products from Malaysia after they determined that our goods were no longer produced with forced labor. The EU intends to phase out imports of palm oil-based biofuel by 2030. That affects Malaysia and Indonesia because we are the two largest palm oil producers in the world. So I think using these standards, can we see the same thing happening for tech? Can we see the same thing happening for data? Bursa Malaysia regulates all publicly listed companies in Malaysia, and they've recently enhanced their sustainability reporting requirements to include data privacy and security. But what does that all mean, right? Like, it's just so much jargon. What does that mean? Like, I just want to know, what are you requiring your companies to do? How can there be better transparency for me? And businesses can also just move ahead of the curve. They don't have to wait for governments anymore. Apple is a great example. So I see some people are using Apple now in the room. It's a great example of how they moved ahead of the curve as well. They just went ahead with innovative privacy and security technologies that were built in to their computer, into their products, on their Safari browser and so on. The market responds happily to this, and companies can learn from this and from Apple. Finally, and most importantly, it's about us. It's about educating ourselves, right? So if you ask yourself today, do you know how many apps you have in your phone? Probably not. You've downloaded like one a day, maybe. And you just rush through the security and the consent forms, right? Because you just want to use that app straight away, and you don't read. Are you aware of what data that you've consented to provide to all these apps and platforms? Can you choose better browsers to protect yourself, especially if you're working on like highly sensitive information? Have you used passwords that are not easily compromised? Where do you store your passwords? So I think those kinds of security checks for ourselves are the same things that we should encourage our peers to do, especially our parents, right, who may have not very much digital knowledge. Where can industry, innovation, and academia come in? All of you brilliant people here, can an app be built that once installed can do this sweep of all apps in your device and tell you what sort of data is being held by which app and for how long? Dr. Azmi mentioned open data. Can we demand better open data requirements from both government and companies about the kinds of data that we are sharing? Ultimately, we need to demand transparency. We need to be told in simple language and in simple terms what sort of data is being collected, held by whom, for how long, and where. We need to be notified of the data breaches, when and if they take place. Data that originates from one country should be held in that country, and if it is being transferred to another location, this should also be informed to us. Stakeholders need to come together to build alliances. The US has something called the National Cybersecurity Alliance. Singapore is also way ahead of Malaysia in this regard. And so I think there's a lot that can be done when you talk about things like transparency demands, ethical business behavior, and how data is handled. So I just want to end with like what we think ideas can do. In the policy world, in the think tank world, the answers are not always clearly black and white. I think I have given you some black and white answers, but the reality is that it's when the stakeholders come together in a room to discuss things and to bring people together, that's when the magic happens. I'll tell you, a story about how we were working on something called procurement. So again, very dry, very boring, like who knows about public procurement here. But public procurement is so important because that's where corruption comes in. The governments have relationships with, long relationship vendors. And what we did was we brought people in a room and we sat them down from government, from private sector for a period of like 12 months. And that's, like I said, where the magic really happened. Agencies from government sat down together under the same roof and said, I've been trying to get a meeting with this agency. This is the same government, yeah? For 2 years, and we haven't got that meeting until ideas brought us together in the same room. We hear the same thing all the time about tech, about SMEs. Basically, my point is policy reform takes a long time. And it's like, it takes so much effort. We've been working on something called political financing regulation. So Malaysia does not have political financing laws, nothing that governs how parties get money. So that's why, money has flown in from overseas, from questionable sources and so on. But we've been working on this for about 4 years, 3 to 4 years, and it's only now that the term having political financing act has entered into the lexicon, right? Politicians now talk about the need for it. But that didn't come out from thin air. We worked hard at it. We had workshops, we've had roundtables, we go down to the ground. Our team just came back from Johor, Malacca. Last weekend it was Terengganu and Pahang, where we speak to not just politicians and policymakers, but people on the ground, asking them, what do you want out of your political parties? What can you expect to have, better, more transparent and rule of law regulations in the country? So I think Nafi said earlier that you don't want this to just be all, okay, everything's bad, but you want us to have some kind of point of optimism, right? So I'm going to take that challenge and tell you today that while you think all may be doom and gloom, AI is going to take over our lives, our identities. If anyone has watched the first episode of the latest Black Mirror season, you'll know what I'm talking about, where not just your voice and video was taken, but the entire person's identity, right? And that's not too far from the truth, right? Recently, the Hollywood writers actually had a huge strike because it's something to do with AI, right? So the writers said that that their roles were being taken away from them because the videos of actors and so on can just be written by AI without having the writer's involvement. So the point is, let's not think about this as doom and gloom. My main points coming here today is, one, this is not new. Regulations will always have to play catch-up game with the private sector. You regulate something today, tomorrow the tech companies are going to do something else, but we can still do things about it. Get government involvement. Regulation is important. Get businesses to know that ESG and BHR are exactly what's expected of them, and we ourselves, educate the people around us, and make use of this kind of collaborations where we can bring stakeholders together in a room and discuss the details, right? The devil's in the details. What kind of policy exactly do we want? Can we have it flexible to make sure there's business efficiency, but also protect the lives of people and make sure that, for example, your savings are all not going to get taken away, your lifetime savings. So with that, I hope and I look forward to seeing how this discussion will move ahead. Policy change is possible. Let's see what kind of policy changes we want to see to make data and democracy possible hand in hand in the future. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Tricia. I'm glad that you highlighted on the policies, how we can make an impact. So us in academia, we always aspire to do that, not just writing papers and publish and so on, but we want to make real impact. And the reality is more difficult. It takes years and years. There's a lot of boundaries, a lot of hesitations and resistance from all parties. So hopefully we can chart some way forward. Any questions for Dr. Tricia? Yes, Dr. Loga. Again.
I heard you saying again. I was just curious to find out that you were saying that I think we have heard this comment many a times that the law and technology have to catch up with each other. It's like a Tom and Jerry cartoon. You're chasing after each other. I'm just wondering, how did Europe manage to achieve this, where they were able to set down the regulation and play catch-up game? How do they manage to do that? Thank you.
I don't know the details of what exactly happened, but this is not a new law, right? The GDPR came up in 2018, so it's already 5 years ago. I think staying ahead of the curve just means that you need to have your research. That's why research is so important, right? To know what's ahead. And of course, the EU, being the EU, has not just regulations on data, but they have, some even complain about the fact that they have too stringent regulations on many other things. So that's the balancing act that needs to be thought through. I mentioned the palm oil biofuel case as well earlier. Some would believe that this regulation is actually protectionist in nature. That this law actually is protectionist over rapeseed oil and the oils that are actually in Europe itself compared to palm oil, which is in Southeast Asia. So my point is that let's also take it with a pinch of salt. Like, not all regulation is necessarily good. There may be negative outcomes, but I think your question is, how did they manage to do it? I don't have the answer to that. I'm sorry, but the EU is just a different kettle of fish altogether. They've built this up over the years, and they had foresight. And research is important. Research to know what's new on the frontiers of technology. Thank you. Any others? Nothing else?
Sorry. Hi. Thank you very much, Tricia. Very illuminating and also somewhat very concerning presentation. And I'm sure we're all mired in this anyway, right? It's today.
Yeah.
And the minute we use Google, I don't think we are so naive as to believe our data has not been sold already.
Yeah.
Right? Because when I was on sabbatical in the Bay Area 10 years ago, What I noticed in Stanford and UC Berkeley and UCSF was that they actually had their own system. They did not use the Google system. They did not use Gmail that we're using so well and so interconnectedly in many other universities worldwide. So that was an observation, and data is being sold as we speak, right? What I wanted to ask you is, how do you see engagement with youths going forward? Because our youth, and quite a number of them are here, are the ones that are very into TikTok, very much into putting data in that space of their uncles, fathers, grannies, whatnots. And they are the ones who may be not that aware of regulations that need to be in place, their own rights, and their data, being misused or abused. I love data, don't get me wrong. I'm a human geneticist, right? I like big data, and we work on big data. How do you see the space in educating people to try and stem this? The horses may have bolted. Maybe there are a few horses left in the stables. How do we actually stem some of these and make people more aware of their rights? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we hope that more like NGOs and groups like us actually will start to create these kind of educational materials, right? I think my biggest concern is actually about children. I have 2 young children, and I don't know photos that have been on social media, which actually I have posted as well. Will those photos actually be used in the future to blackmail them? So I think those concerns are real. We need to. So one thing is definitely educating ourselves and each other. But the other thing was, I'm just curious as well. Like, if any of you have young children, it feels like the more exposed they are, so they're definitely more exposed than us, because we come from a dinosaur generation. It's not at our fingertips, but because they're so exposed to it, it also seems like they have a better handle of what's real and what's not. Now, that's just a hypothesis. I don't know. We were discussing it internally yesterday in my office, and my colleague's daughter actually tells her mom, and she's only like 9, right? Oh, this is not true. We've seen this somewhere else. So I think that exposure in this case might be better than restricting them, because if you restrict them entirely, they're just going to go out and believe everything that they see. So I've tried to start telling my 5-year-old that, so when she watches something on video, I'll ask her, like, do you think that's true? Like, do you think that's real, or is it fake? So I think asking those questions, getting them to think for themselves, is the best way forward. I kind of alluded to that earlier, right? When I said that government can never come up with like the best law and the best policy and regulation, because it will never work. You try and stop, it's that game that you play, the hammering of the, what is it? What animal is it? The whack-a-mole, right? You whack one mole here, something else will pop up. So you can never stem this advent of tech, and that's just the nature of tech. Tech moves fast, right? The collective AI intelligence of the world will just be beyond what we can do, even in our collective, brain space here. Not saying that, you're all stupid. But my point is that I think exposure, it's like the vaccination. You expose yourself to some parts of it so that you can use that muscle. What is the muscle that we need to exercise? We need to exercise the muscle of discernment, the muscle of wisdom, so that the facts that you're receiving, you can make that judgment. So I go back to that story that I said in the very beginning. This boy, right, who came up to me so desperate, tell me what to read. Like, tell me which platforms to believe, because I don't know what to believe anymore. That's the feeling that we get, I think, right? We don't know what to believe. Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, what's real? Who shot the rocket into the church? So I all of my 5 minutes, because I had to leave, I just told him, please just read more. Read as much as you can. Expose yourself to everything. Fake news, real news, whatever it is. And eventually you will somehow be able to have your own filtration system. Like, trust yourself, like, trust your intellect to be able to do that. And this comes, I mean, every forum I go to talks about education system, so I'm going to say it. It comes down to our education system. I mean, it's true, right? Like, are we equipping our children and our people to think for themselves? One of our core principles at Ideas is individual liberty, which believes in this principle, this very basic principle that we all have that individual capacity in our heads, in our brains, to process things, to make sense of things, to conclude with reason and rationale, and to encourage that we do that as well. So we have this liberalism conference every year. I think giving the right to people to question and debate and doubt, that's really the key for me. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, very long answer. Thank you. All right.
Next question? Yes, Emma. Our next speaker.
Thank you for your talk. Very interesting. Just picking up on what Prof. Maud said just before, the problem with our education system is that it's also invaded by Google.
Invaded, you say?
By Google.
Invaded by Google.
Yeah. So the education system is not necessarily a sort of oasis that's free of all these corporate interests that work against us. It's entangled. And so I wonder what you think about, well, increasingly what's happening is that the spaces where we come together are corporate spaces. And that's because of social media being owned by corporations, right? So there's not really any public spaces anymore. So I wonder if you could speak to that. I mean, there's the GDPR, there's the need for content moderation as well as data protection. But then we're always just moderating these corporates, right? So what about public service media? What happened to that? Like, why aren't we talking about public platforms that are owned by people? The people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't think I have the answer. Well, you can tell us your answer. You're speaking next, right, Prof? But I think what comes to mind is Benedict Anderson's Imagine Communities, right? So he wrote this book so long ago, and he talked about how it was text, paper, and then newspapers that allowed allowed governments to create these imagined communities. So he said that nations too are imagined communities, right? Without newspapers, without that text, we would actually never know that we're part of the same nation. So then, if what you're saying is true, which it is, it means that the communities that we are part of now are corporate communities. So it's a corporate platform that we're on. I don't know. I see traditional media as just not being able to catch up either, and they do have a role for sure. Radio, television, all of these are public service platforms that are no longer even relevant today. But there is an interesting possible way of evading this. I think, it's about reactivating, maybe somehow making use of tech and integrating that into the traditional spaces. I don't know exactly how that would work, but yeah, it's again whether government has the capacity and speed to catch up with what's exciting in the corporate and private spaces. Yeah. Thank you. Oh no, there's more. Yes. No.
free traffic of the internet, ECMA is the only way. Right? Every other policy, EU as well, right, has not been right? So ECMA is the only way. And if you ask me, privacy doesn't exist online. You want privacy, don't be online. Right? When you use your Google Map, right, not only we are tracking you, even in Monash, your phone, the Wi-Fi is tracking where you are. You're going to a shopping mall, IKEA, you're in very fast way, never move. Right? There's no such as privacy, it's not privacy, be offline. Right?
Yeah, I was thinking again about that question earlier. This is not the best solution, but it is one solution. And I said that earlier in my speech, and that's competition. So we cannot stop the private corporations from taking over our brain space, right, or taking over the internet. What we can do is make sure that there are laws that don't allow monopolies. So if there is just one big tech corporation that is monopolizing everything that's on our laptops and our devices, then that's actually really a bad thing. What do our laws say about the monopoly of Google? I don't know. But if there are more companies that come up, and if more good tech, so maybe we can frame it as, I don't know, good tech versus bad tech. Are there more good tech companies that can come up and use those platforms for good as opposed to, for bad? I think we all saw what happened when Mark Zuckerberg allowed Facebook to be used and for Russian disinformation in the US. So can there be the reverse of that? I don't know. Create it. We can't. No doom and gloom. Yeah, but I think the catch-up game is really difficult. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I don't have better answers. I think hopefully all of you can answer some of the questions that I couldn't today. But thank you so much for the invitation, and I think I'll just leave now. Thank you.
All right. So thank you, Dr. Tricia.